Hello. Welcome to Peak Health Path, your go-to source for cutting-edge health insights. From mental health to chronic diseases, we bring you expert advice, the latest research, and practical tips to live your best life. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon to stay updated on everything you need to know to stay healthy and happy.
Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the very complex and often misunderstood world of mental health. We're going to explore why mental health is so important and how it really impacts just about every single aspect of our lives. And I think most importantly, we're going to discuss what we can do to protect and nurture our mental health. Now, one of the things that really stood out to me as we were doing our research for this deep dive is that struggling with your mental health can actually increase your risk of developing heart disease. And that's pretty wild to me because it really does highlight the fact that the connection between mental and physical well-being is much stronger than I think we often realize.
Oh, it's very much true. And it really highlights why we need to kind of move beyond thinking about mental health, just in clinical terms. I mean, it's not just about diagnoses and disorders, right? It's about how we feel every day, how we think, and how we act every day. And all of this stuff affects our relationships with other people, our work, our decision-making, how we handle stress, and like you just said, even our physical health.
It really is fascinating how much our mental and physical health are intertwined. So I guess that means that when we talk about someone struggling mentally, it's not just something that's, happening in their head. It can actually manifest in very real physical ways.
Yeah, exactly. And there was a study that was published in the Lancet Psychiatry, and this study found that there's a strong correlation between severe mental health conditions and the development of chronic physical problems. And this is one of the reasons why it's just so important to address mental health in a proactive way rather than just reacting when, things maybe reach a crisis point.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But, I think we often focus so much on the negative side of mental health, the struggles, the disorders. But what about the positive side? Like, how does good mental health empower us? I mean, it's not just about the absence of illness, is it?
Oh, absolutely not. When we're in a good place mentally, when we're mentally healthy, we're so much more than just not sick, right? I mean, we're resilient. We can bounce back from setbacks. We can better handle the stresses that life throws at us. We're also more productive. We can build stronger and healthier relationships with others. We're more likely to reach our full potential as human beings. It's about thriving, not just surviving.
That's a really important distinction, I think, because you're right. It's not about being happy all the time. It's more about having the tools and the resilience to kind of navigate the ups and downs that life throws at us. But it does feel like more people are struggling with their mental health these days. Why is that?
Well, I think there are a few factors at play here. The good news is that I think we are finally starting to talk more openly about mental health. There's less stigma surrounding it these days. More and more people are feeling comfortable seeking help, and that's a really positive development. But on the flip side, there's also the realities of modern life. This always-on, hyper-connected digital world that we all live in. It can be so incredibly stimulating, and it can often lead to chronic stress and burnout.
I know. I feel that pressure a lot. Constantly checking emails, scrolling through social media, and it's exhausting.
It really is, and we have to be very mindful of that. And of course, we can't really ignore the impact of the pandemic either. The isolation, the fear, the uncertainty of it all. It really took a toll on a lot of people's mental well-being.
It was definitely a very challenging time for everyone. So, following all of this, what are some of the practical steps that we can take to try to protect our mental health? We always hear about the basics, but it's really easy to dismiss them as, being overly simplistic.
Oh, I know what you mean. I mean, we always hear about getting enough sleep, eating a balanced diet, and exercising regularly. And it's true that they are pretty simple things. But honestly, these foundational habits are so powerful, because they really lay the groundwork for a healthy mind and body. Think of it this way. You wouldn't expect your car to run well if you don't give it proper fuel or regular maintenance, right? Our brains and bodies are really no different. They need that same kind of care and attention.
That is a great analogy. I like that a lot. So I guess those basic lifestyle choices, those are non-negotiables, right? But what else can we do? It seems like there's so much more to this whole idea of mental health than just eating your vegetables and getting enough sleep.
Oh, there absolutely is. We really need to go beyond the basics. We need to consider, I guess, our mental diet, right? Gentle bodies with healthy food. We need to nourish our minds with activities that bring us joy, reduce stress, and that help us to connect with ourselves and with others.
Okay, I like that, connecting with ourselves. What does that really look like, in practice?
Well, it's about making time for things that help us to relax, to recharge, and to tap into our inner world, so to speak. This could be anything. It could be spending time in nature, practicing yoga or meditation, listening to music, or maybe even engaging in more creative pursuits like painting or writing. These aren't just nice to haves. They're essential for managing stress and for cultivating a sense of inner peace and well-being.
That is a great idea, a mental diet. So it's about being intentional about what we're feeding our minds, just like we try to be intentional about the foods that we eat.
Exactly. And just like with food, it's all about finding what works best for you. What helps you to unwind and to feel grounded, what brings you joy. It's about experimenting and discovering what truly nourishes your mind and your spirit.
That's a really empowering thought because it means that we have a lot more control over our mental well-being than I think we often realize.
Oh, absolutely. And remember, the journey to good mental health, it's not about being perfect. It's about progress, about trying new things and discovering what helps you to feel your best. It's about being kind to yourself and recognizing that there will be ups and downs along the way.
Yeah, that's a really good reminder because we are all human and we do all struggle sometimes. And it's not about being perfect. It's about, just learning and growing and taking care of ourselves along the way.
Speaking of taking care of ourselves, you mentioned the importance of connection earlier. I'm curious to learn more about how that plays a role in our mental health.
Well, connection is absolutely essential. I think it's safe to say that we are social creatures by nature, and strong relationships really do provide us with that sense of belonging, support, and purpose. And, nurturing our relationships with family, with friends, and even our communities, that can have a profound impact on our mental health.
So it's not just about, taking care of ourselves individually. It's about nurturing those connections that we have with others. Yes, exactly. And it's not even just about the quantity of connections either. It's about the quality of those connections. It's about having those meaningful relationships where you feel heard and understood. And it's about knowing that you have people that you can rely on during those challenging times.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just that feeling of being supported and being loved.
Yeah.
But what if we're struggling? What if those connections just aren't enough?
Well, that's where professional help really comes in. If you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're struggling to cope, if you're just concerned about your mental health for whatever reason, don't hesitate to reach out for some professional support. There are therapists, counselors, and other mental health professionals who are specifically trained to help us navigate those challenges.
So it's about recognizing when we need that extra support and not being afraid to ask for it.
Exactly. And there's really no shame in seeking help. In fact, it's a sign of strength and self-awareness.
Yeah. That's a really important message to send.
Yeah.
Because we do all need help sometimes. And reaching out, that's a sign of courage, not weakness.
I completely agree with you there.
Okay, so we've talked about, those foundational lifestyle choices, the importance of that mental diet, and the power of connection. What other kind of practical strategies can we incorporate into our daily lives to support our mental well-being?
Well, there are so many little things that can really make a big difference. And one of my personal favorites is practicing gratitude. Taking just a few moments each day to reflect on the things that we're grateful for. That can really shift our perspective and boost our mood.
That sounds simple enough, but I could see how it would be really impactful. Just focusing on the positive, even when things are tough, it can really help to shift your mindset. What else can we do?
Another really powerful strategy is setting realistic goals. It's easy to get overwhelmed, especially in this day and age when we're trying to do too much at once. So breaking things down into smaller, more manageable steps can make a really big difference.
So it's about celebrating those small wins and not beating yourself up for not doing everything perfectly.
Exactly, exactly. And along those same lines, it's important to remember that we all need breaks. It's so easy to get caught up in that hustle and bustle of daily life, but it's absolutely crucial to step away from it all sometimes and just recharge, whether that's taking a few minutes to meditate or going for a walk or even just disconnecting from technology for a while.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You can't really pour from an empty cup, as they say.
Mm,
We really need to prioritize our own well-being so we can actually show up fully in other areas of our lives.
that's a great way to put it.
We've covered a lot of ground already in this deep dive, but before we move on to the next part, is there anything else you think that our listeners should know about what mental health is or how it really affects us?
Well, we've talked about lifestyle changes, but we haven't really discussed the reasons WHY someone might be struggling with their mental health. And I think it's really important to understand that sometimes it's not just about stress or making different lifestyle choices, because there can be a number of underlying causes that contribute to these mental health challenges.
Okay, yeah, that's a really good point. It's not always as simple as just, thinking positive or going for a walk. So let's explore those underlying causes a bit further. What are some of the factors that might actually contribute to mental health challenges?
Well, one factor can be genetics. Just like we inherit physical health conditions, we can also inherit a predisposition to certain mental health conditions.
So it's not necessarily something people choose or bring on themselves. It can literally be part of their, genetic makeup.
Absolutely. And then brain chemistry can play a role too. Imbalances in certain neurotransmitters, and those are the chemical messengers in our brains. Those can also contribute to conditions like depression and anxiety.
So it's not just, in our heads. It's a very real, very physical thing that's happening in our brains.
Exactly. And I think it's also important to remember that, our life experiences can have a pretty significant impact on our mental health too. Traumatic experiences like abuse or neglect, those can definitely leave deep scars, emotionally. But even things that maybe aren't as dramatic, like chronic stress or maybe major life transitions, those can also contribute to mental health
So it's
challenges.
often a really complex interplay of both nature and nurture.
Yeah, exactly. And it's rarely just one thing. It's usually a combination of many factors that actually contribute to someone's mental health struggle.
Okay, this is all really helpful information. I think our listeners are probably wondering, what if I'm struggling? What are my options for treatment?
That's a great question. And the answer is that there are actually many different approaches to treatment, and the best approach is really going to depend on the individual and, the specific challenges that they're facing.
So a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't really work in this case. Okay, so let's talk about therapy first. What are some of the different types of therapy that are available?
Well, one very common type is cognitive behavioral therapy. It's often called CBT. And it basically focuses on identifying and changing negative thought patterns and behaviors. It's about learning to recognize those thought patterns that are not helpful and then developing some healthier coping mechanisms.
So it's kind of like rewiring our thinking in a way.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And then there's psychodynamic therapy, which explores past experiences and how those might be impacting our current thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So it's more about gaining a deeper understanding of ourselves and how our past might be influencing our present.
Okay, so you're really trying to get to the root of the issue.
Exactly. And, there are many other types of therapy too. Each one has its own unique approach, and it's important to find a therapist who you feel comfortable with and whose approach really resonates with you.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about medication? When is medication typically used?
Well, medication can be really helpful for a variety of mental health conditions, such as depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. Antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, mood stabilizers, those are just a few examples. And they can help to balance out those brain chemicals that we were talking about earlier. And they can also help to alleviate the symptoms, which then allows people to, engage more effectively in therapy and just other aspects of their lives.
So it's about addressing those chemical imbalances that we talked about before.
Precisely. And it's important to remember that medication is often most effective when it's used in conjunction with therapy. So it's kind of a two-pronged approach.
I think there's sometimes a stigma around taking medication for mental health. What would you say to someone who might be a little hesitant about that?
Yeah, I understand that hesitation. You know, there is, unfortunately, a lot of misinformation out there about psychiatric medications. But I think it's important to remember that for many people, these medications are absolutely life-changing. They can help manage symptoms, improve quality of life, and in some cases, they can even save lives.
So it's about seeking the treatment that's right for you without any kind of judgment attached to that.
Yes. Exactly. It's a personal decision. And what works for one person may not work for another. The most important thing is to have those really open and honest conversations with your healthcare provider so that you can determine the best course of treatment for your individual needs.
This has been incredibly insightful. We've really covered some important ground here.
We have. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I think it's really important to emphasize one more thing, and that is that recovery is possible. It's really crucial to remember that there's always light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, you're so right. Because it's easy to feel hopeless when you're struggling, But it is important to remember that things can and do get better.
Exactly. And with the right support and treatment, people can and do recover from these mental health challenges. It's a journey, and it may not always be easy, but it's definitely possible.
And even if you're not struggling with, a specific mental health condition, I think it's still important to really prioritize mental wellness, in general.
Oh, absolutely. Just like we take care of our physical health, we need to nurture our mental health too. It's an ongoing process.
So true. Well, this has been a really eye-opening start to our deep dive into mental health. And we've explored the importance of it, some of the factors that can impact it, and the various treatment options that are available.
It's been a pleasure to discuss this really crucial topic.
Now, in part two of our deep dive, we're going to zoom out a bit and examine the societal factors that influence mental health, because we'll explore how our environment, our communities, and the systems we live in can impact our overall well-being. So be sure to join us for that.
I look forward to it.
Until then, take care of yourselves.
Welcome back to our exploration of mental health.
In part one, we really dug into the individual aspects of mental health, like what it is, how it affects us personally, the steps we can take to improve our well-being. But, we also touched on the fact that it's not all about individual choices, right?
Absolutely. It's not just about individual effort. Our environment, our communities, the systems we live in, all of those play a huge role in shaping our mental well-being.
That's a point that I'm really interested in kind of unpacking further, because it is so easy to feel like, oh, mental health is just my own responsibility, but it's not like we exist in a vacuum. So what are some of those external factors that can really have an impact?
Well, think of it this way. Imagine like a fish that's trying to thrive in a polluted stream. No matter how hard that fish tries to stay healthy, that polluted environment makes it a really, really uphill battle. And, in a similar way, we're all swimming in a societal stream, I guess you could say, and certain factors can really act as pollutants and negatively impact our mental health.
Okay, I like that analogy a lot. It really helps to paint a clear picture. So what are some of those, pollutants in our societal stream that can negatively impact our mental health?
Well, one major one is economic inequality. When there's a huge gap between the rich and the poor, it creates so much stress and insecurity, and not just for those at the bottom, it's for everybody. It can lead to feelings of powerlessness, hopelessness, social isolation.
Yeah, because it's not just about material possessions. More about, feeling valued, feeling like you have a fair shot at life, feeling you belong.
Exactly. And that sense of belonging, that's so crucial for mental well-being. And economic inequality, it can really erode that sense of belonging. It leads to those feelings of isolation and despair that can, really, really impact mental health.
So economic inequality is a big one. What other societal factors, come into play?
Discrimination is another major one, whether it's based on race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, or any other factor. Discrimination creates this really hostile environment that's incredibly damaging to mental health.
Because it's about feeling safe and accepted for who you are, like at your core.
Exactly. Discrimination tells people they are less than. It says they don't belong, they're not worthy of respect or dignity. And, that can lead to feelings of shame, fear, anger, which can then manifest as anxiety, depression, and other mental health challenges.
And I think it's really important to acknowledge these systemic issues have real, tangible consequences for people's mental well-being. It's not just about personal resilience. It's about creating a society that actually supports and uplifts everyone.
Absolutely. And then we can't really ignore the role of, our political climate. When there's so much division and polarization and uncertainty going on in the political sphere, it creates this sense of anxiety and instability that really seeps into our everyday lives. And we see this playing out in very real ways with, people feeling increasingly stressed and anxious about the state of the world.
In the 24/7 news cycle and social media, those just really amplify that feeling. It's like we're just constantly bombarded with negativity, and it's hard to escape.
They definitely contribute, we're constantly exposed to information, often negative and very, fear-mongering, and it's hard to filter it all. It's exhausting, and it can really have a significant impact on our mental well-being.
It's like our brains aren't wired to handle that constant, influx of negativity and stress. So we've talked about economic inequality, discrimination, the political climate. What about access to healthcare? I mean, that's got to play a role too, right?
Absolutely. Access to affordable, quality mental health care is essential, but unfortunately, many people face, really significant barriers to getting the help they need. Whether it's the cost, lack of insurance coverage, long wait lists, or maybe just, not knowing where to turn, all of these barriers can prevent people from getting the support they desperately need.
It's like a double whammy, you're facing these societal stressors that impact your mental health, and then you can't even access the resources that you need to cope.
Exactly. It's a systemic problem that needs to be addressed. We need to make mental health care more accessible, more affordable, and available for everybody, regardless of their income or their background.
So we've identified some of these pollutants in our societal stream, I guess you could say. So what can we do about it? How can we create a healthier environment for mental well-being? It just seems like such a big, complex issue. Where do we even begin?
It is complex, but that doesn't mean that we're powerless. There are things that we can do both individually and collectively to create positive change.
Okay, so let's start with the individual level. What can each of us do to contribute to a more mentally healthy society?
One of the most important things we can do is raise awareness. The more we talk about mental health openly and honestly, the less stigma there will be. We need to normalize conversations about mental health just like we talk about our physical health.
Yeah, because it's not a sign of weakness to struggle, right? It's something that we all experience at some point in our lives.
Exactly. And the more we talk about it, the more we can support each other and, create a culture of understanding and compassion.
Besides talking about it more, what, actions can we?
Well, we can advocate for change, support organizations that are working to improve mental health care access, fight discrimination, promote economic justice, write to your elected officials, volunteer your time, donate to causes that you care about. Every little bit helps.
So we're not powerless. We can make a difference through our actions and our voices.
Absolutely. Our voices matter. And when we come together collectively, we can create real, lasting change.
So what about on a societal level? What kind of systemic changes do we need to see to actually create a truly mentally healthy society?
Well, for starters, we need to invest a lot more in mental health care services. We need more affordable and accessible treatment options, including therapy, medication, support groups. We need to reduce wait times and make sure that everyone has access to quality care, regardless of their income or their insurance status.
It's like we're always talking about mental health awareness, but we need to actually back that up with, some action and resources.
Exactly. Awareness is important, but it's not enough. We need to put our money where our mouth is and invest in the resources and infrastructure that's needed to actually support mental well-being.
So what other, systemic changes do we need to see?
I think we really need to address the root causes of mental health disparities. That means tackling issues like poverty, discrimination, lack of access to education and opportunity. We need to create a more equitable and just society where everyone has the chance to thrive.
So it's about creating a society that supports, mental well-being, not just for some, but for absolutely everyone.
Precisely. And I also think we need to change the way we think about work and productivity. We live in a culture that really glorifies busyness and burnout, and that takes a huge toll on our mental health. We need to create a culture that actually values rest, relaxation, and connection. We need to prioritize our well-being both individually and collectively.
Yeah, it's like we're always on, always connected, always striving for more. And we need to, slow down, disconnect, and really reconnect with ourselves and each other.
Exactly. It's about shifting our values, our priorities, our whole way of life, really. It's about creating a society that truly supports mental well-being, not just for some, but for everyone.
This has been such a thought-provoking conversation. We've explored those individual and societal factors that impact mental health, and we've talked about some of the things that we can do to actually create a more supportive environment.
It's been a pleasure diving into this really important topic with you.
Now, in part 3 of our deep dive, we're going to shift gears a little bit and explore this really fascinating question. What does the future of mental health look like? What new innovations and approaches are on the horizon?
I can't wait to discuss that. There's so much happening in the field of mental health right now. It's a really exciting time to be having these conversations.
So be sure to join us for the final part of our deep dive into mental health. We'll delve into some of the cutting-edge research and innovations that are shaping the future of mental well-being. Welcome back to the deep dive. We spent the last 2 parts really exploring mental health from both the individual and societal perspectives.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground, from those practical strategies for managing stress to the systemic factors that can really impact our well-being, as well as, the challenges that so many people face when it comes to accessing care.
And now, in this final part, we're going to shift our focus to the future. What does the future of mental health actually look like? What exciting innovations and approaches are on the horizon?
Yeah.
I've got to admit, after our previous conversations, I'm kind of looking forward to exploring, the more hopeful side of all of this.
It's a fascinating question, and I'm happy to say that there's actually a lot to be optimistic about. We're really seeing some promising developments in the field of mental health care.
Okay, so let's dive in. What are some of the most exciting trends that you're seeing? What gives you that sense of hope?
One area that's really taking off is technology, believe it or not. We're seeing this huge surge in the development of all kinds of digital mental health tools, things like apps that provide guided meditations or platforms that connect people with therapists via video conferencing.
So technology is making mental health care more accessible and convenient, especially for people, like in rural areas or those who have limited mobility. I mean, that could be a real game changer.
Exactly. These digital tools can really help to bridge those gaps in access to care. And they can also be really helpful for people who, maybe feel intimidated or stigmatized by those more traditional therapy settings. And there's also a growing focus on this idea of personalized medicine, which is really exciting.
What does that mean, like, in the context of mental health? I know it's kind of a buzzword in other areas of healthcare, but I'm not really sure how it applies here.
Well, it basically means tailoring treatments to each individual person based on their own specific needs and even their, genetic makeup. So, for example, researchers are exploring how genetic testing can help to predict which medications will actually be the most effective for a particular person. And that could help to reduce, that trial and error process that can often be so frustrating and time consuming.
Wow, that's incredible. So instead of just a one-size-fits-all approach, we're moving towards like more targeted specific treatments. That feels like a huge step forward.
Oh, absolutely. And that's really just the tip of the iceberg. We're also seeing fascinating developments in areas like, brain stimulation therapies and psychedelic assisted therapy.
Okay, those sound pretty futuristic. Can you explain those a little bit more? I have to admit they sound a little bit intimidating to me.
Sure. So, brain stimulation therapies, things like transcranial magnetic stimulation or TMS, they use magnetic pulses to stimulate specific areas of the brain. And these are areas that are thought to be involved in mood regulation.
And how does that help with mental health? Is it kind of like resetting those areas of the brain?
Yeah, in a way.
Yeah.
It can help to kind of regulate brain activity and alleviate those symptoms of things like depression and anxiety. And the good thing is, it doesn't have all those side effects that can sometimes be associated with medications.
Wow, fascinating. And what about psychedelic-assisted therapy? I've heard a little bit about that, but it seems, I don't know, pretty radical to me.
Well, this is definitely an area that's gaining a lot of attention these days, and rightfully so. Researchers are exploring the potential of certain substances like psilocybin, that's the active compound in magic mushrooms, and MDMA or ecstasy to actually treat conditions like PTSD, addiction, and even end-of-life anxiety. But this is all done, of course, in very controlled therapeutic settings.
So these substances are being used in a very controlled way, not, recreationally. That makes sense. But how do they actually help? Like, what's the mechanism there?
The idea is that these substances can help people to access like deeper levels of consciousness, I guess you could say, and they can facilitate those emotional breakthroughs in a safe and supported environment. So they can help people to process past trauma, confront their fears, and develop new perspectives on some of the challenges that they're facing.
It sounds like there's still a lot of research to be done in this area, but the potential is huge. It really feels like we're kind of on the cusp of this whole new era of understand the brain and how we can treat mental illness.
Oh, absolutely. It's really important to emphasize that these are still very much experimental therapies. A lot more research needs to be done. But the early results, they're very promising. And there's a lot of excitement in the field about the potential of these therapies.
It's really inspiring to hear about all of this innovation and all of this progress. It feels like we're finally starting to take mental health seriously and invest in finding those new and better ways to support people who are struggling.
Yeah, I agree. And beyond these specific treatment approaches, there's also this growing recognition of the importance of a holistic approach to mental health.
Okay, what does that mean? We've talked about holistic approaches in other episodes, but I'm not sure I really get it in this context.
Well, it basically means looking at the whole person. Not just their symptoms. It's about addressing those social, environmental, and lifestyle factors that really contribute to well-being alongside those more traditional therapies or medications.
So it's about creating like a truly supportive environment that fosters mental health on multiple levels, not just treating the symptoms, but addressing those root causes.
Exactly. It's about promoting resilience, connection, a sense of purpose. All of those things are essential for mental well-being.
I love that. It's not just about fixing what's broken. It's about building that strong foundation for mental well-being. It almost feels like a more preventative approach rather than just reacting when things go wrong.
Exactly. And it recognizes that mental health is not a destination. It's a lifelong journey.
This has been such an incredible journey, exploring mental health from so many different angles. We talked about those challenges, the strategies, the societal factors, and now this exciting future that lies ahead. I feel like I've learned so much, and it's given me a lot to think about, both, personally and in terms of how we can all contribute to a more mentally healthy world.
Well, it's been a real pleasure diving deep into this with you. These conversations are so important, and I'm glad we had the chance to explore this topic in such a thorough and comprehensive way.
Before we wrap up this deep dive, any final words of wisdom for our listeners?
Just this. There's hope. No matter what you're going through, there's always hope. There are resources available. There are people who care. And there's a future full of possibilities. Never give up on yourself, and never be afraid to ask for help.
Beautifully said. And I would also add that mental health, it's a journey, not a destination. It's about taking care of ourselves, supporting each other, and embracing those ups and downs along the way. It's about being kind to ourselves and recognizing that we're all in this together.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of mental health. We hope this journey has been insightful, empowering, and maybe even a little bit inspiring. We've covered a lot of ground, but of course the conversation doesn't end here. Keep learning, keep exploring, and keep talking about mental health.
Thanks for joining us.
And remember, take care of your mental well-being. It